Okay, guys, um, we're going to go into the first core study for the learning approach, which is the Bandera study about imitation and aggression. And of course, this is for Psychology 9990, which is AS and A-level psychology. And I wanted to split this study into two parts because there's so much content here. And what I dislike about psychology in general is there's so much memorization in the high school level. But it's also easy for exams because all you gotta do is memorize the key points and just put them on to the paper. So let's take a look at what we need to know and what we will cover. So this is what we will cover for the the whole of the Bandera study. But for part one, we're just going to cover the first four. We're going to talk about the aim of the Bandera study, which is what Bandera study studies, what it is aimed for, what is the use purpose of it, so on. Next, we'll talk about the sample. You should all know what is sample, which is what people participated in this study. Then we're going to talk about the type of experiment. What type of experiment is this? What's the IV, the DV, and the control variables? And finally, we're going to talk about the procedure, how the study is done. Okay, let's get started. And also, I'll just say that I will not talk about any BS in this lesson. I'll try to go as straightforward as possible, giving all the points, but that will also mean the content is a bit compressed. So you would need to go over and write your own notes, paraphrasing what is on this PPT. And also make sure to do practice problems. Okay, so before I start on talking about each point, I want to give an overall overview of this study. So the Bandera study is about imitation and aggression. So that sounds pretty broad. So what it does is it's about a Bobo doll, and it wants to see if children will imitate the aggression of adults to Bobo dolls. So in general, what this study is doing is that children will see adults hitting a Bobo doll. And the experimenter wants to see if the children will copy the adults and also imitate them in hitting the Bobo doll. And what's the purpose of this in general is that they want to see whether there's imitative learning, whether people, such as children, will imitate the aggressive actions of an adult. The details of this we will study later, but this is just a general overview. This study is about investigating whether children will imitate adult aggression towards a Bobo doll. Okay, let's talk about the aim. There's three parts that we need to know for the aim that might come up in the exam. However, the first two do not come up as often, not saying they do not come up. But the last one, which is, so I'll go with them one by one. First, we need to know what is the aim of the study. Which this might seem like cover, but actually aim is very big, very large, very general. So first we need to know what is the aim of the study, and there's about three aims of the study. The second, we will talk about the background of the study, which is what led to this study, or why is this study different from previous research. And finally, we will talk about psychology being investigated. And this is the very important part because it commonly comes up in the exams. And the psychology being investigated basically refers to what type of behavior or learning is being studied in this study. And of course, as we know, it's about imitation. So it's about imitative learning, which, if you watch the assumptions video, is social learning. Social learning is observation of others' behavior, imitate. So with that in mind, let's get into the details. The aim of the Bandera study is threefold, and there are three major aims. And for each aim, I would recommend that instead of memorizing entire aims or entire sentences, memorize keywords. And the other words you can just write randomly or just follow your logic. So there are three aims of the study. The first one is pretty straightforward. It's to investigate whether children will imitate aggressive behaviors from an aggressive model. This is the major key aim of the study. That's very straightforward. We just want to see if the child will imitate the adult in being aggressive and hitting the ball doll. So whether children imitated aggressive behaviors from an aggressive model. Second, and this is quite interesting, is that we will investigate whether children imitated aggressive behaviors of a model in the absence of the model. This is the key. And it's different from the last one. So we want to see whether the children, for example, an adult hit the bubble doll and the adult left. When the adult is left and the model is absent, we want to see whether the child will still imitate the aggressive behavior. This is very important. This is a key differentiator between first and second aim. The first is just to see whether they will imitate. But the second, we also want to know whether they will imitate when the model is absent, when the model is not there. The third one is you will see that the second and third aims are actually extensions of the first aim. Is whether children are more likely to imitate aggressive behavior of the same sex model. So be more specific. Now, what aggressive model but the same sex model? For example, whether boys are more likely to imitate male models and vice versa. Okay, so these are the three aims, just broad memorization. Whether they will imitate aggressive behaviors from an aggressive model, whether they will imitate aggressive behaviors in the absence of the model, and whether they are more likely to imitate from a same-sex model. The background of the study. To remember the background of the study, you just need to understand this point. What are we talking about when we talk about background? It's either what happened before that led to this research, or in this case, how the present study is different from previous research. So, how is the Bandera study different from previous research, and why is it important? So the previous research, and this is related to the previous aims, is that they investigated whether children imitated behaviors of a model in the presence of the model. So we know that the Bandera study is being more specific. They're going to investigate whether children imitated aggressive behaviors in the absence of the model, and not just the absence, but also whether they were more likely to imitate behaviors of a same-sex model. So actually, this is the same as the aims, is how this study is being different to previous studies is that first, instead of being in the presence of models, it investigates in the absence of models and also for same-sex models. Okay, let's quickly go over the previous two. Now, this is very important. And this is going to probably be a 4 or 5 mark question. Here, there are 5 points. Just write these 5 points here. The psychology being investigated, just understand it by, so what type of learning is being investigated, right? The type of learning being investigated is called social learning theory, or just call it social learning if you want. Social learning theory is just a bit more accurate. So social learning is being investigated. And what does social learning refer to? You need to explain what is social learning. Social learning refers to 3 main steps. 3 main steps are involved in social learning. The first stage is that people will pay attention to behaviors of role models. Not just other people. For example, Michael Jordan is a role model, like role models. Adults are role models for children. Your parents are role models for children. So people will pay attention to the behaviors of role models. That's the first stage of social learning. That is the observation stage. Now you can just understand it by observational behaviors. And the behavior observed is retained, is memorized. You pay attention to behavior and you memorize those types of behavior. That's the second stage of social learning. And the third stage is that you will imitate the behavior. Of course, it's imitation, but only if they feel capable of replicating. For example, if Michael Jordan goes for a dunk from the free throw line, you're not going to be able to jump from the free throw line and dunk for the average person. So you might not imitate that, even if it's retained, even if you paid attention. If people feel capable of replicating a behavior of the role model they memorized or they retained, then they might imitate the behavior, and that is social learning, and they will gain this new type of behavior through imitation. These 3 stages explain what is social learning. And The last two are circumstances for social learning, meaning what makes social learning more likely or unlikely. Two factors that influence social learning. So we go to an overview of social learning. First, we explain what is social learning, and then we explain what affects social learning. So when is the imitation or social learning more likely? First, it is more likely if the role model is of the same sex, and this is being investigated in this study, whether these boys will copy the actions of male adults models more than boys will copy the female adult models. And the second is they are more likely to repeat or imitate behavior if they observe the role model get rewarded for such behavior. For example, when Michael Jordan dunks, when Michael Jordan is being tough, if people clap, if people reward the role model for such behavior, they're more likely to imitate this behavior. And this is also pretty intuitive. If you see someone being rewarded for a behavior, you're more likely to copy that behavior. If you see a person not being rewarded or even being punished for a certain behavior, you might not want to copy or imitate that behavior. So these are the two factors, and these are the three explanations. Now let's go to the sample of the study. We finished the aim of the study, and now we're going to look at who participated in the study. Now, the sample will also be 3 to 4 mark questions, or sometimes even 2 or 1 mark questions. I included 4 points here, so we'll cover the whole range. The easiest points to memorize I've included is the first, you want to know the range of the children's age. And it's so easy to memorize. Why is it so easy? Because there's a 69 here. Now, this 69 is really easy to memorize for most people. Just think of the funny number, 69. How do you memorize this 37? Now, I use a interesting technique. Because there are 72 children in total included in this study, I just think you 72 and you reverse it, right? You reverse it, you make it 27. You add 1 to this 10th digit, you make it 3. So it's 37 to 69 years old. So this is the range of the children's age. It's 37 to 69 months old. Its average is hard to memorize, but children aged 37 to 69 months old. And where did they come from? They all came from Stanford Nursery School. And this is also be pretty easy to memorize. Stanford Nursery School. And because it's from Stanford Nursery School, and this study I think was conducted in Stanford, I'm not 100% sure, but it was close to Stanford, if not at Stanford. So because it's convenient sampling, it's recruited from the most readily available and closest sample, the easy sample of children. So it is opportunity sampling. And there are some benefits and disadvantages of opportunity sampling. Opportunity sampling, Stanford Nursery School, 37 to 69 months old. And there's 72 children in total with 36 boys and 36 girls. And you'll see why they set it up like this, even number of 72 later on. So just 72, 36 boys, 36 girls, half. Okay, so that's the sample. Okay, we got 2 done. We still have 2 to go. Now, for the types of experiment, the IV and the DV and the control, there are 4 sections involved here. We will start by talking about the IV because that's the most important and essential part of the experiment. What are we investigating? Think about that when we talk about the IV. The IV is just what are we manipulating, what are we investigating. The DV, dependent variable, is very simple. Controls are very straightforward as well. And then we go on to the type of experiment. This is also very important. Now, the first is not important at all. It's a lab experiment. You just have to keep that in mind. Maybe they'll ask, maybe they won't. I think largely they won't. But just keep in mind that it's a lab experiment because it's conducted in a controlled environment. And then we will talk about why it is a matched pairs participants design. It's actually a matched triplets design. It's a matched triplets design. And if you forgot what is a research design, design is that how participants are allocated to the different levels of IV. So they use the matched triplets design to allocate people to different levels of IV, different experimental conditions. And then we will look at the type of observation used. And the observation is used to measure the dV, of course. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the IV. There are many IVs in this study. And combined, if you combine each of them, there are actually 12 IVs. Now, look at each of them. Think back to what are we aiming to study in this experiment. We want to study, first of all, whether children will imitate aggressive actions from adults. So of course, we need an aggressive adult. We need an aggressive model for the children to imitate. But we also need someone to compare this to. How do we know that the children by itself is not already aggressive and not imitating the adult? So we should have a non-aggressive adult as well. A non-aggressive adult to see whether the children actually imitated their aggressive behavior or they are already just aggressive. We also need a no model situation. And this is the same as the non-aggressive version. What if it's going to be different if there's no model at all? Let's investigate all the possible variables. These are the three types of IVs for the model type. And the reason we need to split these model types, just remember the aim of the study is to study whether there's an imitation of aggressive behavior. So we need an aggressive model, non-aggressive model, and a no model condition. The second aim of the study we wanted to analyze is whether children were more likely to imitate the aggressive behavior from a same-sex model, so the same sex as them. So obviously, we needed to have different sex models. We need a male model, a female model, we need a boy and a girl learner gender. So this is how the 72 students are split up in this sample of 72. That's why we needed 72. We first split it into 3 model conditions. And then for each model condition, there were female models and male models, except for the control group, which had no models. And the reason why there's no models, there's no female and male model group for this no model control group, because obviously there's no models, so there can't be split into female and male model. Okay, so that's the independent variable. So model type, the model gender, and the learner gender are all IVs. And in the exam, just write each one of them in detail. It's not going to use a lot of words. For example, the first IV is model type, which includes aggressive, non-aggressive, no model conditions, and so on and so on. Okay. The dependence variable. What are we measuring in this study? What are we aiming to understand or investigate in this study? Of course, we are trying to understand imitation of aggression, right? We want to know if the children imitated aggression from the adult. Thus, the level of aggression displayed is a dependent variable, which is the thing we are trying to measure. How is it measured? We measure the level of aggression, as we'll see later, through observation of certain types of behaviors. We will go into detail about this in the procedure of the study. And so just briefly, just saying that, broad overview is that a controlled observation was used to measure this dependent variable, and we'll take a brief look at it in this section as well. And aggressive behaviors reported. So not a lot of things you need to know in the independent and dependent variable section. Is not that important, but you should know this because it follows the central thread of the study. Okay, so how about the control variable? The control variable, I'm just going to say it first, and then let's try to understand it. It's the aggression levels of children prior to the experiment. Prior to the experiment, aggression levels. So why do we need to control this? So we know that we are investigating imitation of aggression in this experiment. However, certain children are naturally more aggressive. So they may be more likely to imitate aggressive behavior, which will influence the sex model. Even the non-sex model, they will influence the study. Or they may not have imitated the behavior of adults at all. They may have no model, but they're still extremely aggressive because they're more aggressive prior to experiment naturally. Thus, we need to control the levels of aggression for each independent variable, each experimental condition, to make sure that this individual difference, this participant variable, is eliminated. And we will talk about how we eliminate this how we control this variable, how we eliminate this individual difference through the research design, which is the matched triplets design. And here we go, a matched participants design, or matched triplets. In the syllabus, it's called matched pairs. I really do not know what they want you to write in the exam. I don't know which one is correct, but I'm just going to say matched participants or matched triplets design. So as we know, we need to control the prior aggression levels of the children, right? And in order to do that, in order to control that, in order to make sure that for each experimental condition, the children have similar levels of prior aggression levels, we use this matched triplets design to make sure we match the children into triplets. So 3 people in one group. We match the 72 children, or the 36 boys, 36 girls, into 12 groups, each in 12 groups of 3s, right? In groups of 3. And for each person in each group of 3, we randomly allocate them into a different level of IV, to a different model type, with aggressive, non-aggressive, no model type. So for each triplet, we just randomly allocate each one of them to a different level of IV. And that, by doing so, we can make sure that the participants in each of the IVs have a similar level of prior aggression levels. So that is a broad generalization of how we use this matched pairs design. Now, more importantly is how, which is how do we match the children into triplets in the first place? How do we know, how do we match them into similar levels of prior aggression levels? So here is how. So the prior aggression levels of each children is rated individually by 1 teacher and 1 researcher. This who is very important. First is the who. Sorry for bad handwriting, but who. First one of the who is 1 teacher and 1 researcher. They will ask you about this. 1 teacher and 1 researcher rated the children. And what did they use for the rating? So we talk about the what. What did they use for rating? They used the 4-item 5-point scale. So let's break this down. A 4-item means 4 questions. And a 5-point scale means each question will be rated from 1 to 5. So that's a 4-item 5-point scale. There are 4 questions and each question rated from a scale of 1 to 5. So what does the 4 items measure? What does the 4 questions each measure? One of the questions or one of the items measure physical aggression, the physical. Second, verbal aggression. Third, aggression towards inanimate objects. And the last one is aggression inhibition. Not a lot of technique here, just broad memorization. But maybe you can think about the 2 sides, right? First, physical and then verbal aggression. These are easy to memorize, but then you can think about inanimate objects, inhibition is hard to do. And after these 4 items, the 4 separate questions, the 4 items measuring physical, verbal, inanimate, inhibition are rated by the researcher and teacher. The composite score is given to each student by summing up the scores of each item, the summing up the score from each question. So composite score is given. So who, what, and the composite score is produced. And then after a composite score is produced, we know the prior aggression levels of each children. We can then match them into triplets based on similar scores, similar composite scores. And after they are matched into triplets, each child assigned randomly from each triplet, each child is assigned randomly to a different condition of the 3 types of models, aggressive, non-aggressive, or no model. Okay. So as you can see, we split the 72, which is 36 boys and 36 girls, into the 3 sections. But because it's 36 boys and 36 girls, so we match the triplets, I should say this, within the boy and girl group. So we do not mix the boy and girl group. So 36 means 12 boys to this, 12 boys to this, and 12 boys to this, and 12 girls to this, 12 girls to this, and 12 girls to this. Okay. As the matched participants design, 5 points here. So the type of observation used. Before we talk about the type of observation used, we need to understand why. So we need to understand why, and then let's talk about how we do it. So why is an observation needed? As I mentioned before, an observation is needed because to measure the DV, which is the level of aggression. In order to, how do we know whether the children imitated the aggression from the adults? How do we know that? How do we measure that? Well, we use an observation by the researcher. So how does the researcher observe the children? So first of all, it's through a covert observation. And what if you forgot what's a covert observation? It's just an observation when the participant is unaware of the presence of the observer. So the participant does not know that they are being observed, and the observer is not there. So participant cannot see the observer. And how is this done? It is done through a one-way mirror. So later on, you will see that in room 3, there will be 3 rooms in total. In room 3, the aggressive behavior is being measured, and it is observed through a one-way mirror by the researcher. That makes it a covert observation. It is also a structured observation. And a characteristic of a structured observation is time sampling. And I'll also explain what is a structured observation through this time sampling. The time sampling means that it is behavior is recorded in regular intervals of time. And this is an example. Behaviors are recorded every 5 seconds. It's a regular interval of time. And in total, 240 of these 5-second intervals, so 240 response units, are recorded and observed per child. So what is recorded every 5 seconds? So for every 5 seconds, we place the 5-second behavior into a predetermined category. I'll go into detail about this later on. So but this is what is time sampling, and this is what is a structured observation. So every 5 seconds, every regular interval for 240 response units, place each unit of observed behavior into a predetermined category of behavior. For example, aggression, non-aggression, imitative aggression, so on, into a category of behavior. That's the type of observation used, covert and structured. And you should also be able to explain why. And actually, we are done with the first 3. We are actually already on to the last section. We're actually going pretty quickly, but the procedure has a lot of content. And this is not going to be easy. First of all, I'm just going to give a broad overview of the procedure so you have a better understanding when we go into the details. There's going to be 3 rooms in the Bandera experiment. Room 1, room 2, and room 3. And each room serves a different purpose. And before looking at the purpose of each room, which is detailed in here, let's look at what is each room. The first room, I call it the initial room. The second, I call it a waiting room. And the third, I call it an experimental room. It's not much information here, but just keep in mind these are the names. You don't need to memorize the names, just keep it in mind. Use it, try to use it to understand it. Okay. So what is room 1 used for? In room 1, the children is given the opportunity to observe the aggressive behavior from the adult model. So room 1 is all about observation of the aggressive behavior by the children. So children observe. The second one is about arousing aggression. We try to arouse the children's aggression. We make them irritated so that in experiment room, in the room 3, they would display more aggression. So in room 2 is arousal. Room 3 is the imitation of aggressive behavior. We observe whether the children would display the aggressive behavior they observed in room 1. So this is actually pretty easy to understand and memorize the overall function of each room. The first is for observation of the aggressive behavior. Then we move on to arousal, and finally we move on to observing whether they will imitate the aggressive behavior. And because the first one is for observation of the adult model's aggressive behavior, we used an adult-sized bubble doll of 152 centimeters. This is just memorization. There's no technique here. And in room 3, there's a little bit of technique because it is about the observation of the child's aggressive behavior. I use the child-sized bubble doll, which is smaller and it's 92 centimeters. Okay, that's just a broad overview. Let's start with room 1. And for room 1, we need to know 3 things. So first, why and what's the purpose? Second, the setup procedure. And third, what does the model do? Now, you don't need to understand the purpose. No, you don't need to memorize the purpose of the room 1. You just need to understand it and basically have it in your mind. So because it will help you understand the setup procedure for room 1 and the procedures of room 1. But you will not be tested on its purpose on the exams. So in general, the room 1 is used for observation, as we have touched on previously. And it's for observing the aggressive behavior or the non-aggressive behavior of the model. And later we will see if the child will imitate the aggressive or non-aggressive behavior which they observe in room 1. So room 1 is used essentially for observation purposes. Now, setup procedure and what does the model do? So what does these two in general mean? Just looking from a macro perspective, the setup procedure just refers to how the room is laid out and the procedures that leads up to the experimental condition. So what are the steps before the model starts hitting the bubble doll or starts doing some non-aggressive or aggressive behavior? What is the procedure which leads up to the experimental conditions? And the model's actions, that is the experimental procedure. So what does they do, which the people might imitate? And for what does the model do, we need to know what does the model for the aggressive model do and what does the non-aggressive model do. Obviously, their actions are going to be different. So with that in mind, let's take a more detailed look. Now, this, of course, is a lot of words. You do not need to know every single step. The maximum amount of points, I think, is about 5, but they will ask you about the details. So that is very unfortunate. There's not a lot of technique here. There's a lot of memorization, but if you follow its general logic, you should be able to understand the setup procedure. So as you see, where does the setup procedure start and where does the setup procedure end? As you have touched on previously, it starts, it's basically the procedure up to the point where the experimental condition starts. So the start of course, is the child is brought to the room, and then is the experimental left the room and the model starts acting well later on, as you will see. So that's just a general overview. Now let's take a look at the details. Okay, one by one. Step 1, each child is brought to the room separately. So you just need to remember, step 1 is that each child is brought into a room, which is the room 1, separately. After they are brought into the room, this is very trash. I would just consider giving up this point, honestly. After the child is brought to the room, the child is taken to a corner of the room which looks like a playing area, and they're seated at a small table there. This also follows common sense and logic. Here, each child is brought to a room, and they're brought to this kind of playing area that is used for playing. For example, look like this, like playing area. So they're brought into the room. They're brought to the corner of the room, which looks like a playing area. They're seated at a table, and what do they do at this table? What do they do at this table? So what they do is they do some drawing. How do they do this drawing and producing pictures? They use this thing called potato prints and stickers. So what are potato prints? Just take a look at this photo here. Potato prints is basically these types of markers or prints that are on these potato-like shapes, and you can create these drawings and shapes on paper. So the children get to use potato prints and stickers to make pictures. And the experimenter demonstrates to the child how to use these potato chip prints and stickers to produce the pictures. Okay, brief review so far. Each child is first brought to the room separately. After they're brought into the room, they're placed in a corner of the room, which looks like a playing area, and they're seated at a table there. And after they are brought to the playing area, the experimenter demonstrates to them how to use potato prints, which is this, and stickers to produce pictures, and they're left to produce pictures. And that's playing. Okay, so you also need to know this detail. They might ask you this, they might not, but It's not that important, but you should keep it in mind. So what does the stickers include? It includes attractive multicolored pictures of animals, flowers, and famous Western figures. So just remember animals, flowers, Western figures. There's not much technique here, just broad memorization. Okay. So after the child is brought to this playing area and left to play, the experimenter stayed after the experiment stayed in the room so that the child could not leave. And this step might seem quite confusing right now, so let's skip it for now and look at the next step so that hopefully you will be better to understand it. So the child is seated at this table, right, and left to play. And after the child began playing with these potato prints and the stickers and started producing pictures, the experiment brought the model to the opposite corner of the room from the child. So now the model is introduced. So the model is in the same room as the child, and the model is brought to the opposite corner of the room from the child. And there, the model will start to hit the bubble doll later on. So what does the corner include? Corner contains a small table and chair, a Tinker toy set, and a mallet. A mallet is just like a sort of hitter, and a Tinker toy set is just some type of toy. So where's the bubble doll? Now, I'm also confused, but they didn't say that the bubble doll was in that corner. They didn't include it. I guess you just ignored it, but just that's just how it is. Okay. So the model is seated at their own table at this corner, and the experimenter finally left the room. And the reason why they need to stay in this room so that the child cannot leave is that, the experimenter first, the model went to the opposite corner, right? And the opposite corner, and after the model is seated down, only then the experimenter left the room so that the child could not leave during this when the model was getting settled. Okay, so let's take a look at a review of this entire process. I would consider giving up this point, and I would give up this point here. The other points generally follow logic. The child is first brought to the room. They're seated to a corner, which looks like a playing area, so where they are seated. And then what are they left to do? They play this potato prints and stickers to make pictures, and experiment demonstrates them how. And after the child began playing with these potato prints and stickers, the model is brought to the opposite side of the room from the child. And after the model to the opposite side of the room, the model is seated at their own table, and the experiment leaves the room. So that's generally the process of room 1, setup procedure. And after the setup procedure, actually, let's rest for 5 seconds because it's a lot of content, of course. So just take a deep breath for 5 seconds and then let's continue. Okay. So after the setup procedure, we move on to the model's behavior, which is the experimental procedure, if you would like to call it that. After the room is set up, now the experiment actually begins and the model starts to act, and we will see what the model does for the two conditions, the non-aggressive model and the aggressive model. Now, because there's also no model condition, but there's no model there at all, so of course then you don't need to care about that. In the non-aggressive model condition, it is very, very simple. The model simply assembled the Tinker toy set for all 10 minutes. If you go back, you will see that actually it's not written here, but room 1 as whole is just 10 minutes entirely. Like room 1 only takes up 10 minutes, and in the non-aggressive room, the model just spends all that time disassembling the Tinker toy set. That's the non-aggressive model. For the aggressive model, of course, we know that the model is going to commit some sort of aggressive behavior towards the bubble doll. But first, the model assembled the Tinker toy set for 1 minute. This should be attacked. Sorry for that. But then, so there's 3 stages for the aggressive model. I will split into 3 stages to memorize it. First, the first stage, or the first section, is that the model assembled the Tinker toy set for 1 minute. In the second stage, or the second section, the model attacked the 152 cm bubble doll. And how did they attack it? They followed this sort of 4-step procedure that was repeated 3 times over 9 minutes. So each time is about 3 minutes. And you'll realize that 9 plus 1, that's 10, which is the entirety of this room 1's time. So this sequence of attacks is repeated 3 times. So what is this sequence of attacks? First, the bubble doll is laid on its side. This is just drama memorization here because without some sort of visualization or video, that will be a bit better. So consider searching up that, but as this is just a review, let's just keep on going and take a look at the exam techniques. So the 4 sequences is the bubble doll is first laid on its side. The model then sat on it and punched its nose. And then the model picked the doll up and hit it on the head with a mallet. And then the model tossed it up in the air and kicked it. So that's the 4 steps. Just memorize those. It's not a lot of logic here. And the third section, I wouldn't call this stage 3 since it's simultaneous with stage 2. So while the model is attacking the bubble doll, it also made verbal comments during the attacks. And there are 2 types of comments that are made by each model, whether for the non-aggressive or aggressive. Probably not for the non-aggressive model, sorry. Only for the aggressive model. Every aggressive model made 2 types of comments, the aggressive comments and non-aggressive comments. Aggressive comments, just remember about 2 for aggressive comments and 1 for non-aggressive comments. That should be enough. Aggressive comments just include kick him, sock him, and non-aggressive comments just includes he sure is a tough fella. Okay, so that's it for room 1. Setup procedure and model behavior. A broad overview. The setup procedure is just the child is introduced to the room and how it's brought to their own playing space, and the model is brought to their playing space, and the experiment leaves the room. That's the entire process of the setup procedure. And broadly, the model behavior is the non-aggressive model just played with the toy for all 10 minutes, and for the aggressive model, they played with the toy for 1 minute, and then they went through the sequence of attacks and repeated those 3 times. Okay. Now let's move on to room 2. After room 1, observing the aggressive or non-aggressive behavior is done, we're going to go to arousal, which is room 2. Now, what is arousal and what is the purpose of room 2? So this room's purpose is, since we want to see if the child will imitate aggression in room 3, imitate the aggression they observed in room 1, we want to first arouse their level of aggression to a higher level to see that whether they will imitate the aggressive acts that they saw in room 1 or they will do some other aggressive acts. So room 1's purpose is arousing the children's aggression. And then we're going to look at how. So how is arousal done? So this is the key of room 2 is what is the aggression arousal procedure? So this one is a lot simpler and there's a lot fewer content in room 2. It's the easiest one and it's a lot more easy to visualize. So first, of course, the children is brought to a waiting room containing attractive toys. So first, the children are brought to this room, which is a waiting room. Room 2 is a waiting room. They're brought to a waiting room, they're introduced to this room, and it contains attractive toys. And you need to know what types of toys there is inside this room. There's a fire engine, which looks like this to stop fires. There's a locomotive, which is a train. There's a crib, which sucks. It's this type of weird thing. There's a car and there's a doll. You probably only need to know 2 to 3 of these. You do not need to know all of them. But it is better, of course, if you know most of them. And the children were told they could play with these toys that they're given inside of this waiting room. And after about 2 minutes of play, the experimenter stopped the child from playing with these toys. And the experimenter explains that she did not just let anyone play with the toys and decided the toys were served for other children. So notice what the experimenter did here. The purpose of room 2 is to arouse aggression. So the experimenter purposely just told or basically insulted the child and said that she did not let anyone play with the toys and toys were reserved for other children, basically telling children they were not good enough and the toys were for better children. So they gave them a lot of attractive toys and they took it away and told the child it was not good enough. They're not good enough to play with the toys. And through this process aroused the aggression of the children. Okay. So room 2 is done. Moving on to room 3, which is the final room. Finally getting to the key of our experiment, just about imitation. Whether the children will actually imitate the aggressive behaviors they have observed and retained, hopefully, in room 1. So the purpose is very easy as well. You do not need to know this again. So in room 3, the child is now finally given the opportunity to hit a bubble doll and imitate the aggressive behavior they observed from the mother. How will this be done? The how includes a lot of steps, as you can see here, 5 different sections. We're going to walk through each of them, and I'm going to briefly explain why each one is necessary. Of course, we need to know the room setup. We need to know the layout of room 3, how room 3 is set up. This will be key to help us understand what happens inside of this room. So first, we need to know the room setup, of course. And then we need to know about observation. So what is observation? So how is the children's behavior observed in this room 3? Because of course, we know that we're investigating whether the child will imitate these aggressive behaviors in room 3, right? So we need to use observations and types of observations to see how much or will the child imitate the behavior of imitate the aggressive behaviors of the models. And then there will be this weird thing called 3 response measures and 5 other categories of children's imitation. So what does that mean? There's 3 response measures. Sorry, I was gonna get drank some water. So, what is the 3 response measures? We know that we're trying to investigate how much the child will imitate the aggressive behavior, right? But how do we measure aggressive behavior? How do we categorize? How do we operationalize? How do we define aggressive behavior? This is why we need these 3 response measures, because we use these response measures or response categories that are used in observations to measure aggressive behavior, to define aggressive behavior. We want to categorize the child's behavior into a certain measure or a certain category. So that is what is the 3 response measures and 5 other categories are for. 3 response measures are the 3 major categories of aggressive behavior, and we'll take a look at a more detailed look at these later on. So that's why we need these 2, because we need to categorize the child's behavior, whether it is aggressive or non-aggressive, and so on. And finally, of course, we need to know how the data was collected during the observation and how the data is tested for reliability. This is pretty straightforward, I think. Okay, let's go into room 3, starting with observations. So how is observations conducted? So the purpose of observation is obviously to measure aggression levels and imitation levels of the children. So how much they imitate the aggressive behavior they observed in room 1. Of course, you do not need to memorize this. Try to understand the purpose. You should be able to figure it out. Now, there are 2 types of observations employed in this, which we mentioned before already. So this is a review. It's a covert observation because in room 3, the children observed through a one-way mirror, so they are not aware of the presence of the observer. And it's also controlled observation using time sampling, because every 5 seconds, because the children are observed every 5 seconds, and every 5 seconds interval it's called a response unit, and there are 240 response units in total. And for each response unit, it is put in a category, a predetermined behavior category. And this is what we were talking about previously. This is what we mean by the 3 response measures and the 5 other categories. So essentially, for each response unit, we are putting it into a response measure or a category of behavior. Okay, so that's observation. Just a quick review. Going on to room setup. Now, obviously, there is a 92 cm bubble doll. That's the size for children. And in room 3, there are aggressive toys. And there are also non-aggressive toys. And we're going to take a look at both. And there's a lot of content here. For the aggressive toys, there is a gun. There's 2 dart guns, actually. And guard gun is, of course, like this type of Nerf gun here. There is a mallet and a pegboard. So this mallet is also used to hit the bubble doll by the model. But this is paired with a pegboard in this room 3. There's also a tetherball hanging from the ceiling with a human face painted on it. So this is pretty similar to a bubble doll, except it's a tetherball, and this is the tetherball, and it's hanging from the ceiling. So it's hanging from like the ceiling. It looks like this, and there's a face on it. So you can hit the face, and that's also aggressive acts. So these are the aggressive toys in room 3. There are also unaggressive toys, these non-aggressive toys. And there are 4 of them. There's a tea set, as you can see here. There are 2 dolls, as you can see here. There are 3 bears, and there are cars and trucks. These are the non-aggressive toys. Just straight up memorization, not much I can say here. But I think you just need to know about 2 of these. You do not need to know all of them. So just pick the ones you think are the easiest to remember. Okay. And there is this thing worth noticing here. The toys are actually placed in the same order for every children trial. So every trial, every children that comes into room 3, we reorder the toys into the same exact position for each time. So they are placed in the same order as well as the same position. And the reason why we do that in the experiment in room 3 is to ensure good reliability and good validity. Now why? Because the position of the toys might influence whether the children will play with the toy or not. For example, if it's closer to them, maybe it's more likely they will play with the toy. So that is an extraneous variable. That's a situational variable. And since this is a lab experiment, we want to tightly control extraneous variables, the situational variables. So this is an artificial environment. So we want to control the position of the toys placed as well, the order of the toys placed as well. Okay, so this is a room setup. There are aggressive toys. There are non-aggressive toys. There's a bubble doll, a 92 cm bubble doll, and toys are placed in the same order for every trial. Okay, that's the room setup. So here's a review, an overall review of the toys in each of the rooms, room 1, room 2, and room 3. Now, this is very hard to memorize. To be honest, I also really struggle to memorize these. But you have to do it. It's just the pain of AS level psychology. But in general, take a look at this review. In room 1, the child and the experimenter is given different toys or different settings. The child is given potato chips and potato prints and stickers. And the stickers contain animals, flowers, and Western figures. So that's what you need to know for the child. Potato prints and stickers, and animals, flowers, Western figures. And they're used to produce pictures. So you just need to know these. The experimenter is, of course, given a mallet to hit the bubble doll with. They're also given a Tinker toy set, and these 2 are the more important ones. A mallet and a Tinker toy set. So for the non-aggressive model, of course, they just play with the Tinker toy set for all 10 minutes. In room 2, there are many attractive toys: a locomotive, fire engine, a car, crib, a doll. So you will realize that in room 2 and room 1, all of these are singles, right? There's just 1 fire engine, 1 locomotive, 1 car, 1 crib, 1 doll. But room 3, it gets kind of weird: 2 dart guns, 2 dolls, 3 bears. So it gets a bit more difficult. In room 3, there are aggressive toys and there's non-aggressive toys. Just like in room 1, there's a child and experimenter, different toys. For the aggressive toys, there are 2 dart guns. This is easy to memorize. There's also a tetherball with face painted hanging from ceiling. And there's a pegboard and a mallet. And this mallet is easy to memorize as well since you need it to hit the bubble doll with. The non-aggressive toys, there's 2 dolls, there's a tea set, 3 bears, cars and trucks. I would choose the tea set. That's hard. That's a bit easier to memorize. And then I would choose cars and trucks because that is also a bit slightly easier to memorize. Since you do not need to know that there's 2 dolls and 3 bears, just remember there's a tea set and there's a cars and trucks there in room 3. Okay, this is the review of toys in every single room. Please pause if you think you need to write some notes. Please don't just listen. Also make sure to write your own notes and then do some practice problems later on. And we're also going to do a brief review. Actually, we're not going to review because we don't have enough time. Let's just go on. In room 3, there are, as we know, we need to measure the imitation of aggressive behaviors. And in order to measure the aggressive behaviors of the children through the observations, we need to put the response units of every 5-second intervals into categories, right? We need to categorize the behaviors. And there are 3 major response measures, or 3 major categories, which we can place the behavior in. 3 types of imitation are the 3 response measures, major response measures. 3 types of imitation. Imitation of physical aggression, verbal aggression, or non-aggressive verbal responses. And we're going to take a look at these in detail as well. But this is actually in conjunction with room 1. If we take a look at room 1, just briefly, what did the model do? Think, what did the model do? First, the model hits the bubble doll. This is aggressive action. But second of all, the model also made aggressive verbal comments. But they also did non-aggressive verbal comments. There are 3 types of possible imitations from the child. Is either aggressive behavior towards the bubble doll, a physical aggression, or verbal aggression, or verbal non-aggression. So the 3 types of possible imitations. Okay, now let's take a look at these in more detail. Now, you should know these in each one of these and some examples for them. Now, it's actually really easy to remember them if you know what the models did in room 1. Because imitation of physical aggression, you just need to write what did the model do in room 1 and just copy it here. Imitation of verbal aggression, just copy the verbal aggression of the model in room 1. And non-aggressive verbal responses, just copy the model's non-aggressive verbal comments in room 1. And of course here, kick him, sock him, those are the 2. He sure is a tough fella and he keeps coming back for more. These are non-aggressive verbal comments. And physical aggression, of course, laying it on his side, sat on it and punched his nose, picked it up and hit his head with a mallet and tossed it up in the air and hit it. So these are the 3 response measures, the 3 types of imitations that could have happened from the children. And then we're going to look at 5 other categories, which is not entirely imitation or no imitation at all. So these are the 3 major imitations, direct imitations of the actions from the adult model they observed. Okay. Then the 5 other categories. The 5 other categories are slightly harder to memorize. So we're going to take it slightly slower here. The first one is easy to understand. Partially imitative aggression. Before, took an entire imitation of physical aggression of how hitting the bubble doll. Now we're going to take a look at partial imitative aggression, whether it's verbal or non-verbal. Partially imitative. So partially imitative refers to either striking objects in the room other than a bubble doll with a mallet, or laying a ball on, sitting on it, but not attacking. So similar to the adult model in certain ways, but also different. So here it's sitting on it, but not attacking it, not hitting it. The adult model actually sat on the bubble doll and punched its nose. So there's similarity, but there's also difference. That's what meant by partial imitative aggression. Aggressive gunplay is a non-imitative one. Aggressive gunplay also counts as aggressive, but that's not complete imitation. So aggressive gunplay, what does aggressive gunplay include? Shooting, aiming the dart gun, or fire imaginary shots at objects in the room. Not much I can say here, just memorization. Just not much I can say here. And then there's non-imitative physical and verbal aggression. The way to understand or memorize these points is, before we were talking about imitation, direct imitation. So of course we need partial imitative aggression, partial imitation. And then besides partial imitation, then we're going to go to worst, so no imitation. So what are the types of no imitation? Aggressive gunplay is similar, but it's still not completely imitation. Non-imitative physical and verbal aggression. So this is further. And then we're going to go to non-aggressive play, which is just completely not imitation. And then just sitting quietly without playing at all, just playing. So we're just not playing at all, and so that is just completely non-imitation. So these are the types. And so what are the types of non-imitative physical and verbal aggression? So we need to take a look at the physical and the verbal. For the verbal remarks, you should remember that there are the aggressive verbal responses and non-aggressive verbal responses may include kick him, sock him, he sure is a tough fella, he keeps coming back for more, things like that. So the non-imitative physical and verbal aggression will just include verbal remarks other than the ones you've seen previously, like kick him, sock him. For example, can be cut him, stupid ball, hitting the bubble doll, other things like that. Remarks other than those in the verbal aggression imitation category. The physical ones is similar, just aggressive acts directed at objects other than those in the physical aggression imitation category. For example, pushing or slapping, because if you sit on it or if you hit it on the nose, if you do any sort of imitation, it will be either in the partial imitative aggression one or just the physical imitation one. Okay, and then there's non-aggressive play and sitting quietly without playing at all. Just remember these. It's not much I can do here. I think we are near the end. This is actually, I think, the final slide here. After this, we're about just to go over a broad review, and then we're going to end this. So finally, we get to data collection. So we observed all of this type of stuff. We know how to observe. So who is going to observe, and how are we going to collect this data? So the who that is going to observe all of this behavior and rate this behavior and categorize this behavior is a male observer will rate the children where he wasn't the model for. So he doesn't know what experimental condition, the IV, the child is in. So this basically means that a male observer that also serves as a model, because he is also a model for a certain group of children. But this will rate the children he wasn't a model for. So this will reduce observer bias, because if he knows what condition the child is or he was the model for the children, he might be biased. So rate the children where he wasn't the model for. And there's a second observer who rated half the children independently for inter-rater reliability. Of course, we know that there's a second observer that increases the reliability, since it means it can be replicated. The results can be replicated. I also rated half the children independently for inter-rater reliability. So finally, we see that the R equals 0.9, the correlation coefficient between the result of male observer 1 and the second observer is about 0.9, which is high correlation, meaning high inter-rater reliability. So if you don't know what's inter-rater reliability, it just means whether the results can be replicated, the experimental results can be replicated amongst different researchers. So here we have a second observer or second researcher rating the children. So if they produce similar observations and similar findings, that means that there's a high reliability in the findings, high inter-rater reliability. Okay, so that's actually the end of procedures. That's the end of room 3. Let's go for a general overview of what happens in room 1, room 2, and room 3. Room 1 is about observations. In total, it was 10 minutes. What happened in this observation? First, there is a setup procedure. And second of all, the model started behaving. The model's behavior was split up into two types. There's a non-aggressive and there's aggressive. Now, I'm going to stop. Try to fill in all the details. Try to think, try to memorize, recall what happened in room 1. Okay, there's a non-aggressive model and there's an aggressive model, and they did different actions. The non-aggressive model just played with the Tinker toy set for all 10 minutes. The aggressive model played with the Tinker toy set for 1 minute and went on to attack the Bobo doll using a sequence of moves for 9 minutes, and they repeated the sequence 3 times. That's essentially what happened in room 1. There's a setup, the child is led into a room, led to a playing area, the model is placed in their playing area, and then there's a non-aggressive, aggressive model in room 1. So that's room 1. Room 2 is all about arousing the children's aggression. So how do we do that? First, we give the children a lot of attractive toys, and then we take it away. So the children is led into this waiting room that has many attractive toys. Try to recall what toys there were. Give you 2 seconds, 1 second. Okay, there's a locomotive, a fire engine. Try to fill in the rest. So after they're given these attractive toys, they play for 2 minutes, and then the experimenter just took these toys away from the children and told them that the toys were reserved for other children because they did not let all the children play. Could not let all the children play with them. So basically telling the children they are not good enough and insulting the children. So that's arousing aggression. Room 3 is about imitation. It's all about imitation. It's about finally being observing whether the child imitates the aggression they observed in room 1 or the non-aggression. So we need to know how the observation is done, first of all. It's a covert observation done through a one-way mirror, and it's a controlled observation. 5-second intervals, 240 response unit. And each response unit is categorized into a predetermined response measure. Okay, so that is how the observation is conducted. Then we need to know the room layout. There are aggressive toys there, there are non-aggressive toys there. You need to know all of them. Try to remember what are the toys in this room, the aggressive and the non-aggressive. And they're given these toys to play with, and there are 3 major response measures in this condition, which is the 3 imitations. So it may imitate the physical aggressive behavior, the verbal aggressive behavior, or they may imitate the non-aggressive verbal behavior. So the 3 types of imitation. And then we move on to the 5 other categories, which is then just a lot of content. And there's other 5 categories, which includes partial imitation going to no imitation at all. And then after the 5, I think that's all, right? Yeah, then there's a data collection and reliability, which I just talked about. This is a pretty simple one. So just 2 observers observed, and for inter-rater reliability, and that's all. So that's room 1, room 2, and room 3. Room 1 is about observation. Room 2 is about arousing aggression, and room 3 is about observing the imitation of aggressive behavior from the children. All right, it has been an incredibly long lesson. We only covered half of the content, but hopefully we'll go back and this is helpful. There's so much content here. There's so much memorization, but there are also parts where you can do some sort of understanding, and if you give up just 1 or 2 points, you can use your understanding to make up most of it. So good luck with your future work. Hope you can this had helped you. I hope you can continue to make your own notes and do some practice problems. I'm always rooting for you, and please subscribe. See you next time for part 2 of the Bandera study.